Hello, this is Jeff Beaudry, and I'd like to talk a little bit about visual learning today. I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation. Lenny Shaletsky, my co-presenter and co-author and good friend, will be moderating and doing all of the very wonderful introductions, and we'll pull this all together for you. But I would like to talk about three things: the foundation ideas behind visual learning and visual representations, in particular concept mapping and spatial learning. And secondly, I'd like to talk about the impact that there's a demonstrated empirical research and in many different cultures so far on the impact of this particular set of strategies on achievement and motivation. And finally, I'd like to just talk a little bit about three of the different approaches or strategies we could use to actually produce those impacts. One of the things that we like to say that Lenny and I like to point to is the fact that the empirical research in concept mapping has been quite strong. And we felt that our book, The Cases on Teaching Critical Thinking Through Visual Representation Strategies, could dig more deeply into the teacher practice of how this worked, and that we didn't necessarily have to look at the experimental evidence, because there's quite a bit of that. There have been a number of studies done, and they've been gathered together in a review and quantitative reviews and meta-analysis, and the effect sizes generally are quite high, of 0.60, and this has been found in numerous studies. The one I would point to is the Visible Learning by John Hattie, who has come out with a review of the high-impact strategies for achievement and motivation. And concept mapping is classified as a high-impact strategy if done well. And this is something that we found in our book as well, that teachers talked about this in two ways. One of them was the impact on individual students' thinking. The other way was an impact on the way that students collaborated and talked about their maps with other students and with other audiences to solve problems. So how do we actually do this with students? And the book that Lenny and I co-edited has 19 wonderful chapters of teachers and students who are grappling with very difficult ideas and using this as one of many strategies. I would say that mapping and collaborative thinking, that is talking with someone else about what you're doing, is the key thing to keep in mind. But let's talk a little bit more about how this affects the learner and what they can do. So you see in this map, we're going to talk about learner engagement, how ideas are organized and consolidated, and making connections, which we know is an important thing for a learner, so that the ideas become broader and deeper and have a more sound basis in their thinking. And then the transfer of these complex ideas into more creative expressions like writing, speaking, and building multimedia. So learner engagement is something to keep in mind, because it's an important move for teachers to make when they want to energize students. Brainstorming is a wonderful activity for energizing students, generating ideas, what I call a generative flow, where they start to progressively differentiate ideas and to see how they're different. You ask a student, what is a city? And they'll tell you what a city is. Well, students have different ideas of what cities are based on where they've been. We call our city Portland a city, but it's very different from Shanghai or Beijing or New York. So we have to talk about what is a city and get those ideas. And this has a very, very big effect on learning, on motivation. Students get very energized. When the work comes into play, then they have something to refer to. They already have what I would call a formative assessment product to refer to as they grow and learn and progressively differentiate the ideas. As they go into this phase, they're going into what I call a critical thinking flow, which is to then dive deeper into ideas and start to manipulate them and move them and reorganize them. It's the remapping phase in which the learners start to integrate and reconcile the different parts of the knowledge that they're starting to learn. And so hence that learning takes on a more important kind of meaning to them, because they're actually starting to see their ideas shift and change. And as a teacher, you facilitate that process. And this is where the effect size starts to come down a little bit, but nevertheless it has a high impact on learning. And finally, we have the transfer of ideas, which is what you'll hear many of the presenters, and certainly Lenny will talk about how the maps help transfer ideas into writing and into speaking. This is a lot of the area where I did research with my colleague Richard Sinatra, and we found that students, once they mapped ideas into different formats, could write and this helped to scaffold or to support their writing. So just think about this. As a second language learner, I've seen many presentations on this. Someone who is in a second language environment, how could this kind of representation help you write? So what you would do is you would focus and write a small part on visual literacy here at the top. Then you might write 2 sentences about what learner engagement is, and then more about what the impact is. So each one of these different visual representations or symbols becomes an area for you to concentrate and focus your writing or your speaking. If the logic starts to become changed, you can make those changes then very quickly. So this whole idea of mapping has a great deal of impact on the way students feel about their thinking. That is, they start to get a sense of joy and happiness when they see these ideas represented visually and very quickly. There's also a sense of accomplishment as you go through the stages of organizing and reorganizing, mapping and remapping. I've seen teachers do up to as many as 7 different revisions of maps with their students in a unit of study. And finally, these are very effective when we want to transfer the ideas from a map stage into other expressions like speaking, writing, and creating multimedia. Well, this is Jeff Beaudry, and here I am sitting at my computer working on the wonderful projects like this one on concept mapping and learning. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity for joining you for this Sino-American Educational Symposium. I would like to suggest that mapping has a very good contribution to make to second language learning, and suggest that in the future we collaborate to create a better understanding of how mapping and visual thinking can help us all both become more motivated learners, understand ideas more deeply, and then communicate them more effectively. So thank you again. Look forward to hearing from you, and I'll turn it back over to Lenny now.